There's no sugarcoating it. Tekken is in a crisis of authenticity, and I think a serious one. This isn't your usual internet fighting game drama of, oh, I didn't like the new DLC, or why didn't they include Tifa in Season 1, and that kind of day-to-day little grumbles. No, this is a situation I have never seen before. In all of my years of being a Tekken fan, and especially following it very closely in the modern fighting game era, the post-Street Fighter 4 era, I have not seen Tekken in the situation that we currently find it, where it is being discussed with a level of anger and outrage, I think justified outrage, that I have never seen before. Because Tekken, up to this point, has always been the cool fighting game. It has always been the real one, where the commentators and players, they're a little bit more edgy, they're more fun, they keep it real. And all of this corporate monetization, microtransaction stuff, yeah, that's Capcom. That's DLC on disc. Tekken is authentic. It is the fighting game series for the serious underdogs. At least that is what its brand has been. But now Tekken is a whole different situation. It is no longer the Tekken Tag 2 era. It is no longer even the early Tekken 7 era, where all of its fans are cheering for it and pushing for it and trying their best to get the game's attention, to get people to understand how great Tekken is once you give it a chance. Those days are over. Now Tekken is this big juggernaut with big bills and big esports goals, and I do not think it is handling the transition to this scale all that well. And being a Dead or Alive fan, I can confidently say that the road Tekken is currently taking does not end well. It feels good at first. It feels great, I am sure, back at the Namco offices to get in these microtransactions, to get the extra income. But ultimately what ended up happening is Dead or Alive used up all of its integrity, all of its goodwill, and then when DOA 6 came out, the slightest controversy, the slightest issue, and everyone stepped away like, all right, that's enough. We're done with this. And it dropped like a dead bird, and we're probably not going to see Dead or Alive for quite a while as a result. And as a friend, Tekken, it's time to sit down. It's time to talk about what you're up to. Friends don't let friends take things this far. We're sure it was fun at first to party on the weekend, but now that's turned into drinking every night, to now we come over and you're cracking open the bottle at 9 in the morning, constantly hungover. This is not the path you want to go down, Tekken. And so consider this a friend-to-friend
intervention.
Because when it comes to adding monetization to your fighting game, you know you've hit rock bottom when you have to go to your big daddy Steam and ask him to forgive a lot of the negative reviews of your monetization, which is shady as I must say, and we'll talk about that more later on. But to begin with, let's start by talking about how we got to this situation in the first place. If we return back to the initial launch of Tekken 8 in January, that release was very solid. Everything looked as it was supposed to, and about as good as we could hope for. I wasn't thrilled with the nerfs to the backdash and the inclusion of the heat system, because I thought that could really introduce some balance problems if it's not properly balanced, as we end up seeing happening later on. If you look at the IGN review, they're just slobbering over the heat system. But the problem with it is that it's also just this big, dangerous X factor when it comes to game balance. And this is where I think things can get a little bit scary. As the game expands, which it will, because it's a modern fighting game, and the roster gets bigger and bigger, and they start adding in Tifa, and they start adding in all these other characters, this heat system could become a real mess, and it has the potential to start overpowering the core gameplay too much. But that initial first impression of the game was very solid, and I was really satisfied and happy, and I thought, okay, there's some real hope for this release. This could be a great era of Tekken, because it's building off what Tekken 7 did. It's commercializing it a little bit more, it's making it a little bit more accessible, but it's still retaining the heart of the Tekken series, and I think most of us pretty much agreed on that front. So the release of Tekken 8, swimming, it looked great. But then just a month later, at the end of February, what do we get? Boom, boom, boom. We get the inclusion of the DLC shop, which we all knew was planned from the beginning. It's not like they had an emergency boardroom mid-January and they're like, oh man, we're not making enough money on the initial sales. Let's add in a DLC shop. No, that's complete. We all know what ended up happening is Namco was deciding to play some Machiavellian 4D chess and release the initial version of the game without the DLC shop to avoid any type of critique, and I think also to get undeserved praise, because I was like, whoa, very refreshing release. I think all of us were thinking that. But the withholding of the DLC shop was a manipulation tactic that I wasn't fond of, and I covered here on the channel, but I remember the reception to this very clearly because most people at that time, because Tekken at that point still had a lot of goodwill and everything had been going well up to that point, it was like, all right, that was not a great move, Namco. We all know that wasn't a great move, but we'll kind of forgive it and move forward. So there was a bit of a blip there in discussion, but overall, people were willing to forgive. And then we continue to move through the year with Tekken 8, and the concerns about the heat system really do start to show themselves. The balance of the game really starts to show itself. And we end up seeing top players like me not being too thrilled with this really aggressive style and shift to the movement system. But more importantly, I think, this really aggressive 50-50 game that the heat system started to introduce. And this has been a problem, I think, from Tekken 7 as well, where once you get that initial launcher in Tekken 7 or knockdown, it would kind of go on into this really extended punishment mix-up situation that has continued to get longer and longer between the Tekken games when they added bound and all that type of stuff. But Tekken 8 then pushed that to the next level, where not only do you have this long extended punishment game, but now thanks to the heat system, it's extended even more and then ends in a mix-up for the aggressor because you're able to activate heat mid-combo and then bring out the heat dash stuff and all of these meter-based offensive options that simply were not available in Tekken 7. So that is not a great dynamic to see in the high level in the long term, and I've heard a lot of the higher level players not being thrilled about this and sort of just at the best accepting it as, well, this is the price of having a casually accessible game. And that is a mantra you're going to hear about Tekken 8 constantly. It could just be the subtitle, Tekken 8, the price of the casual interest. That could be the title of the game, because that constantly comes up throughout all of these problems. So we go through there, and then we make it to the first Evo for Tekken 8. It ended up being exactly how Nia described it and how a lot of people have been describing it, where once you get that knockdown, you're just watching dudes do mix-ups on each other, Vortex style. It doesn't have that same back and forth neutral spacing that was more prevalent in Tekken 7. And that is kind of ironic because Tekken 7 struggled with that even compared to the earlier Tekken games. But I think the difference is Tekken 7, despite all the weight of all the casual options they put on top of that game, it still had enough of the fundamentals to carry all of these casual shifts, but barely. Tekken 7 could like barely maintain it, and then Tekken 8 just pushes it way too far and it falls over on its face. At least that's how it's starting to seem and starting to feel. And so I went ahead and did something interesting where I took the first Evo of Tekken 7 FR, the console version with the meter and all that stuff. That was in 2016. And I just took 15 random matches from that top 8. And then I went ahead and got the first Evo of Tekken 8 and took 15 random matches and then overlaid them next to each other just randomly, just to kind of get a feel for the difference between how the games played at their first Evos. And I know that Tekken 7 had an arcade legacy before FR, but FR was the one that brought in the rage drives and the meters and Akuma and all that stuff. So I thought it would be the best direct comparison. There's still a lot more backdashing and neutral happening in the Tekken 7 matches, there is a lot of punishment and mix-ups, but Tekken 8, they're just running at each other almost constantly. If you go through and see the amount of backdashes and the amount of neutral interaction, it's a lot more reduced. It's actually, ironically, a lot more like Dead or Alive. I knew the gameplay of Tekken 8 felt and looked familiar because when I was playing it, I felt like I knew what to do, but I couldn't quite pinpoint where that feeling came from. And then watching back the footage, I realized, oh, this is a lot like Dead or Alive, where the meta of Dead or Alive is you move into each other and there's a lot of crouch dash into fuzzy guard. But the big difference, of course, between the Dead or Alive system and Tekken 8 is Dead or Alive has holds. And so holds really add a whole new dimension and layer to this always aggressive style of gameplay, because during hit stun, you can hold in Dead or Alive. So you're never quite safe doing strings in Dead or Alive unless they're 100% guaranteed, which are pretty rare because of the counter hold system. So the game remains very interactive even when it's really aggressive because of the holds. Tekken 8 doesn't have holds. You don't have anything to act out of hit stun in Tekken 8. So what ends up happening is, since it doesn't have as much of that spacing defensive dynamic from the previous games, when you get that initial hit, it just becomes very rote and one-sided, where one guy is pressing a whole lot of buttons and the other guy is watching the other guy press buttons. So the exchanges of Tekken 8 start to feel more stiff and robotic than games of the past. And you'll notice that over the course of this year, which has been very active in terms of esports, Tekken 8 is yet to produce anything of real hype or interest like the rise of Tekken 7, which was full of a lot more standout, memorable moments like Lil Majin at EVO.
Who woke the baby? Be careful. He's cranky. Oh boy. You got him from the back. Oh man. Majin, this momentum is helping out picks on JDCR. Might not be able to retaliate. Who knows? Oh, he's awake. That was the last one. It was just a button check. I'm good to go. Oh, that first match definitely is scouting him out. More pressure. What's he going to do now? Yeesh. Pedal kick. Counter hit on that. He interrupts, and he gets another counter hit. Counter hit, push, guaranteed follow-up. Majin. Oh my gosh. Oh, he does it. He still gets. Oh, yes!
3-0, take this. Oh, right back at you. A reverse sweep.
This isn't going to work. We're going to need to get a stunt double in here. I need a stunt double in here. Oh, my God.
Oh, I love this guy. Majin playing it up to the...
Or JDCR versus Knee, the greatest set of all time, I believe. All of that stuff, when you sat down and watched Tekken 7, it was exciting, except at the end. The later seasons of Tekken 7 started to feel more like what we see now in Tekken 8. But those initial 2 years of Tekken 7 on console, where people were paying attention to it and playing it, which would be equivalent to what should be Tekken 8 right now, the vibe, the excitement, the interest was so different than what we see with Tekken 8, which brings us to October and the great DLC stage heard around the world. And I want to have a in-depth conversation about this stage DLC, because as silly as it may seem externally, if you just hear the snapshot of Tekken fans are angry about the stage DLC of Tekken 8, it's really easy to minimize it that way, and I know a lot of people are tempted to minimize it that way, but this is the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say. There's a lot more to it than just simply people didn't want to pay $5 for a DLC stage. First of all, like I said, Tekken 8 had that hidden shop that it brought out in February, so that was shady. And then it's just really struggled in terms of finding its footing gameplay-wise, balance-wise, so that's not going well. And then you add on top of that the really lackluster DLC stuff that they've released, the 3 characters, Lydia, Eddie, and Heihachi. Lydia seems kind of cool, I'll give her that. Eddie looks like XX Tenacion, or whatever his name was. I think his design looks really stupid, to be honest. He looks like he has a 18-year-old's face on a grown man's body. I think it looks really weird and awkward, to be honest. And then Heihachi, that's the third DLC character. Remember, coming into this, let's not forget, people were convinced Tifa would be in this lineup. And of course, even if people didn't get Tifa, there was a lot of excitement and hype around the Season 1 pass. And it's really important to bring this up because even though I don't buy Season 1 passes, this is the new meta that these companies are now taking. And I think it is 100% justified and important to include this stuff when you review these games, Steam, because from what I can tell, it seems like when they were getting a bunch of backlash for this stage DLC, Namco started to sweat because their Steam reviews started to dip down into the negative territory. And so they got on the horn, they got a hold of people at Steam, and they're like, bros, can you do us a solid? Because these guys are review bombing our game, so to say. People have described it in that manner. But I don't think that is a justified excuse. And I do not think that is justified language for what is happening. Because yes, I am very aware of review bombing, where maybe there's some political, cultural issue that some poor game runs across, and that can cause a bunch of people to come at the game and or the movie or whatever it is and review bomb it, or maybe an actor says something stupid in an interview that isn't directly maybe related to the game or the movie. I get that, but that definitely is not what's happening with Tekken 8 because the monetization of Tekken 8 is part of the product. That is something people paid for because if you look at the Ultimate Edition of Tekken 8, that mother is $110, nearly double the asking price for the game and double the price of what games were at one point. That is a serious amount of money, and that is money that as a customer and fan of Tekken, you are investing in the game. It's low-key like a secret little Kickstarter that modern developers have figured out because you have no clue what is on the other side of that $110. You are completely putting your faith in Namco that, okay, I trust you guys. You guys did a great job with Tekken 7. You have got this great reputation. You're authentic. You're real. I'm going to trust you and give you this money up front to do what you need to do with the money. And so Namco, the Tekken team, are pulling this money in on spec. There's no actual product, the extra money of the Ultimate Pass, to back up this money. It's all purely on faith and trust. And then what do they deliver in result? They give you 3 pretty underwhelming characters. Heihachi is ridiculous that they give you Heihachi. He's in every game, in every Tekken series by default. And maybe if they make him a little more robust with moves, it's not interesting or exciting. When they first showed the trailer for Heihachi, I legit thought it was Raiden from Mortal Kombat. And I was like, all right, that's kind of cool. Raiden from Mortal Kombat? That's wild. No, it's just Heihachi. That's really lame, especially because he's part of the launch cast every single time. And this is just the new meta we see now where you just take a legacy character and stick him back in. I don't know. I really dislike this type of stuff. And obviously, the fans are reaching a breaking point. And then here's the part that I absolutely 1000% understand and think it's completely justified. You spend all of this money on this Ultimate Pass, and they have the balls to then charge you $5 extra for a stage that you assume everything that they put in this game on spec when you bought it. You assume everything they would put in this game would be included in this Ultimate Pass. I mean, that's just a handshake agreement there. And then they go ahead and try to just scrape out a little bit of extra money from people who invested in this game. That response, those negative reviews, if I bought that Ultimate Pass, 1010%, I would be pissed and I would drop that negative review. It's not the same thing as review bombing because this is Tekken and their own customers. This is customer interaction and it's built into the game. With great monetization comes great responsibility. If you are monetizing the shit out of your game, you need to do it right, and you need to be very careful with the fire you're playing with, especially in the genre of fighting games. And this is a topic I really wanted to cover in this video, which is, I think what is happening, just taking a step back, is Namco they're spending a ton of money on their esports stuff, on the budget of the game, on maintaining the game. That I absolutely believe. And what's funny is a while back, I saw some sort of video or article claiming that esports are dying and are failing, but fighting games are beating the esports trend. And, you know, fighting games aren't going to follow the same fate as these esports. I'm like, that's calling it way too early, my friend, because fighting games have just begun to enter the world of esports. So of course they haven't suffered the consequences, but just give it time. And we're starting to see, because as great as these big fighting game tournaments are, I love competitive fighting games and all that, but the problem that we are seeing, and I think esports ran into as well, is the cost is not being recouped naturally. They're not self-sustaining. These big prize tournaments, they don't make enough money for Namco to justify themselves. So they need to supplement these tournaments and so forth through other means. And the justification we've heard time and time again, we'll continue here, is like, well, the poor casuals, they need to pay up and pony up so that the competitive players can play their game. But that isn't sustainable. And ironically, if you open this Pandora's box of basing your entire monetization, basing your entire business model on catering to casual players over all of these years of Tekken personalities and Tekken people saying, hey, we got to cater to the casuals. Hey, the game, we need to cater to the casuals. That's great, but there's a flip side to that, which is you can't be punk and cool anymore and pretend, oh, the casuals, because guess what? The casuals are now paying your bills, playa. So the key difference that I don't think Namco has thought through is they must have gone to gotcha monetization whale hunting school and sat down in the seminar and decided, all right, let's use these Western monetization practices that MOBAs and so forth use and apply them to our fighting game and make extra revenue. Isn't that a great idea? But they're not understanding that the fighting game genre, the fighting game model of game design is not compatible with gotcha style monetization or whatever style monetization, microtransactions that we see today. Because if you go directly to the source, like there's this great but terrifying lecture about how to add monetization into your games, and I'll play a little clip of it here. But one of the key things about adding monetization to your game is do not make it too skill-based.
Remember, there are 4 ways of progressing in games in general. You can have a skill-based game, you can have a luck-based game, you can have a game where you just progress by grinding, or you can pay to progress. Make sure that your games aren't too skill-based. I made that mistake myself. A too skill-based game, you don't get people to pay you because there's no reason to. So make sure grinding and paying are legitimate versions of progressing in the game.
And if you go through all the quadrants of what makes a game really monetizable, fighting games do not follow any of these trends. They are not a good fit because fighting games come from a lineage of arcade design, and their natural design complements that era. And so the big problem that I don't think Namco understands is that the games who get away with this style of monetization are psychologically addictive and not really that skill-based. They inherit their design from gambling and pachinko and all that kind of stuff. They're compulsive games. They're games that, even though you know they're shady, even though you know they're scummy and just trying to take your money, they play on your compulsive inputs to get you engaged and paying the money and being like, ah, well, it's just for fun. That's the mentality of these types of games. Fighting games are completely different than that. If you want to sell someone a fighting game, you need to have trust and faith, and the game needs to have integrity, because fighting games are frustrating, they're complicated, they're difficult, they're extremely skill-based. Even with heat, they're still extremely skill-based. And so they need to win over their players the old-fashioned way. They need to win over their players through goodwill and word of mouth and community. That is how Tekken 7 got to where it was. And I don't think that's totally the lesson that Tekken fans understand. If you listen to a lot of Tekken players, they seem to think that the reason why Tekken 7 succeeded was because it was casual friendly and accessible and kind of the precursor to what we see in Tekken 8. It's just very consumable and easy to get into. But I don't agree. I think the success of Tekken 7, sure, those things helped a little bit, but I remember really clearly watching the rise of that game, having followed Tekken Tag 2 to Tekken 7, is all of that goodwill among the player base and the excitement for the series of the player base that was still strong in Tekken Tag 2 just was allowed to grow and develop. And then when Tekken 7 had its big chance, especially in contrast with Street Fighter V, I think if there was no Street Fighter V, there would be no Tekken 7 as we know it today. Street Fighter V basically ran into a lot of the same problems of authenticity that we are seeing in Tekken 8. And a lot of the fighting game fans and prospective fighting game fans were like, what are the other alternatives? And here's the cool boy in class sitting in the back smoking a cigarette, Tekken 7. And that was the vibe. I remember, like, all the cool gamers, if you're like not lame, you were going to be picking up Tekken and playing Tekken. And it had such a strong reputation and word of mouth. And there's a lot of positivity around the game that started to decline by like later seasons. But those initial FR seasons of Tekken 7 were, I think, a really special time and maybe a once in a lifetime if we continue down this road for the franchise. And I think that's the key difference that needs to be discussed is if Tekken 8 is to continue and do well, it needs to turn, and it needs to turn right now. I'm assuming season 2, these are yearly, right? So I'm assuming season 2 starts in January or whatever. They need to really shift the tone of this game, and they really need to drop as much as they can all of this monetization, all of this trying to be esports, and get back to the roots and get back to their core player base. And returning to the topic of the Steam reviews, we need to discuss this language of off-topic review activity, as Steam puts it. Now, there isn't a ton of transparency going on here, where Steam hasn't exactly said what this activity is. It's not saying these are bots. It's not clarifying, but if you go in and go to the Steam page and then click on it and then say read the reviews, and you scroll through the reviews, to me it seems like these are actual real reviews from real customers, and this off-topic activity is that people are complaining about the microtransactions and the monetization choices that Namco are making. And like I said earlier, this cannot be construed as off-topic activity because this is something that is directly in the game. This is not off-topic in the sense that you went and bought Tekken 8 at GameStop and the GameStop decided to mark it up to $110 because you knew you wanted it and he had the only copy in town. That's not what's happening. This price and charge is coming from Namco themselves. It is coming from the game. It is built into the game. It is as fundamental to the game as hitboxes and frame data. The difference is that we don't really have a good metric right now to judge and assess, all right, what is healthy DLC practice? What is healthy monetization? What is acceptable? What isn't acceptable? We don't have a critical reference for that. I don't have a critical reference for that, but I think there is one really clear sign that it's not working. If you get massive backlash from your customers and you get massive backlash in Steam reviews, that means you probably did something wrong. You probably took it a bit too far. And I call this video an intervention because this isn't just some drama. This is some real serious grown-up stuff that could really damage the integrity of the series moving forward, that may end the series moving forward, because all of these franchises that have these arcade legacies are on a razor's edge. They are this close from disappearing from existence. Look at the post Harada made a few months back about Soul Calibur and the loss of Soul Calibur and where that went wrong. We could call that post foreshadowing at this point, because as I was going through and reading that, I was like, a lot of this sounds kind of applicable to Tekken, no? And so, yeah, it is not a big reach to see Tekken going the exact way that Soul Calibur went, that Dead or Alive went, that many of these series are starting to go, because they are really hanging on in terms of their legacy business model But that doesn't mean the answer is to just destroy all integrity in pursuit of these monetization models, because I think we're going to come to a point here, and this will kind of separate me from maybe the greater Tekken community, is there's going to come a point perhaps, and we may be right close to it now, where something's got to give. Either Tekken as a series is going to have to give, or this whole esports dream is going to have to drop off a bit, and maybe Namco are going to have to cool it on that and take a step back and say, hey, we're going to have to take it easy on all of this esports stuff because we can't support it financially, and we can't just continue to batter the greater fan base of the series in order to justify this big esports dream. Something's got to give, and I would rather personally see Tekken hang in there and stay alive and continue forward as a series with some solid goodwill, even if it is scaled back in sales and esports, because Dead or Alive had an esports circuit. You all probably don't even remember that, and it's because the marketing bonus that esports brings, yes, it's there, I am sure, but it isn't infinitely paying off. Like, there comes a point where you can only esports so much more in terms of getting more sales, and then it starts becoming a deficit. And if Namco were willing to incur that deficit in grace and kind of tank it, sure, but that's not what's happening. They're desperately trying to make up this cost, obviously, through these really shady, shitty monetization models that don't fit the identity of the franchise, that don't fit the genre itself. Dead or Alive has proven that. And as much fun as the wider internet has in experiencing the schadenfreude of watching a great series like Tekken crumble and fall on its face, there is a base pleasure that I know the internet takes part in, that sometimes if I'm not fans of things, it's hard to resist kind of watching it, like the train crash into a brick wall. But the thing I think it's very important to keep in mind, to keep these sorts of videos and discussions a bit more on focus, is that the sad reality is that if Tekken falls on its face and crumbles and ends up disappearing from the relevant fighting game scene, it's not like in the big smoking crater of Tekken, something awesome is going to replace it. I know that's sort of a fantasy we might have and might share. Is like, all right, if we obliterate all of the new stuff and all of this sort of lame mainstream stuff we have now, in the wreckage, something awesome will appear. No, I don't think that's what's going to happen. Instead, in the wreckage, it's just going to be oblivion. There's not going to be anything of Tekken's scale to replace it anytime soon. And it's actually the reverse, where if Tekken can hang in there and recoup its goodwill and get sober, then hopefully it can pave the way for more series to follow a more healthy model, and we might see Virtua Fighter return, and Soul Calibur and Dead or Alive might stick their heads out again. But right now, I do not think Tekken is setting a good example, and I think it is counterproductive to its overall health to pretend that it is. And if you enjoyed this review, please, if you can, support me on Patreon. Speaking of all this monetization and stuff, I'm now a full-time YouTuber, and how I make it and hope to make it is mostly through my Patreon. So I'd really appreciate any support if possible. And if you enjoyed this topic and discussion, I would say definitely check out my Dead or Alive 4 review, because it ties in nicely with this whole conversation around the relationship between esports and game design, and how I do not think this whole esports dream is totally going to pan out, and maybe we need to consider it more in terms of longevity. So thanks so much. Adios, everyone.
So thank you to the $5 patrons, 100, Absconditis, Accepting Panda, Anhold, AJA, Alistair Stevenson, Alexander Pfeiffer, Anthony A, Arcade Hell, Air Viper, Au Ally, Autonamed, Battle Mode, Beam Pit, Bo, Ben Foster, Vito Dames, Blade Symphony, Boghog, Board Bismati, Borgie22, Chad Memphis, Chase Palumbo, Jay Phillip, Christopher R, Chronic Burnout 3, Clara Cliff, Clay Binkley, Climby Coyote, Coast, Cooksand666, Cook Some Soup, CSP 3900, Des Audio, DRK, Dan Matei, Dances with Incels, Darren Griffin, Dave Hansen, David Aldris, David Crespo, Dead Idun, Demian Smirnov, Desolis, Dimension Diver, Dingo, Dio Domke, Dio, DJ420 Praise It, Drano, Dr. Bosky, Duckies, Eduardo, Edvard, Elbin, Senesev, Eleanor Moon, Eliza Alonso, Eric Houdini, Eddie Zerker, Explosive General Games, Falcus, Benich, Fiskin, Florida Sucks, Forbidden and Dave, Frames Per Human, Francisco, Freckle Lord, Full Set, Game Soup, Game Boy Gru, Gojira Green, GPM, Gustavo Sanchez, Hawk, Hans Kowalski, Hausu, Hiroda, Hikihime, Han Harthy, Hud, Hugh Mungus, Jake Ryan, Jack Walsh, Jacob Grossman, Jacob Valenzuela, Jay McCarthy, J67, JLab, JBRPG, Jimmy Strickens, Jake Hans, JMD, John Kelly, John Longwalker, John Simpson, Josaka, Josh Mayer, Julian Elwood, Jurgen, K, K2, Kane Evans, Ken 10082, Kill All Music, Kiskin, Kiss Kissian, Contain, Praise the Boys, Lingoblian, Ludwa, Luperta, Lord Harrington, Lorian, Mad Combaticus, Malaise, Mario Simic, Mark Sloan, Mars Bar, Master Zeon, Matt O'Leary, Matthew Woodford, Maz, Makaroka, Minong, Meester, Metal Slime Drummer, New Jam, Michael De Polito, Michael McCord, My Lady, Mike Mel, Milo Chanel, Mr. Mamma Mia, Mitwid, Morog, Monroe, Miles P, Mishkin, Nathaniel Davis, NCR Trooper Scout, Nico Perro, Neon Dagger Games, Nervous J, Ogre Mode, Oakland Kugels, Patrick Baseman, Paul Jablonski, Paul Osterman, Powell Perot, Pedro Perez, Philip Plus, PLP, Poor Little Pigeon, Poorly Written Protagonist, PRK, Psycho Blizzard, Queen Charlene, Quinlan Yeager, R2 Sinus, Ralph Trujillo, Raul, Rapido, RC, Real Skeen, Brent Holtz Time, Retrojet, Retro Man, Retro Schmupper, Riff Mason, Rip the Jacker, Robert Chang, Rory Starks, Wolf015, Salmon Connections, Sam, San Nevo, Zarn, Scanline City, Seymour, Segfault, Shader Bunny, Chantech, Chazzy, Shift D, Shmup Junkie, Shmup Run, Zeropong, Social Kid, Spiders STG, Spongy, Steady AI, Stephen Bridges, Stepleable, Steve Fiction, Street Magic, Superfunk, Swoop, Kamzarian, Taze Ryu, The Boot Rex, The Dirty Screech, The N1, The Old Fensta, Thom McCarthy, Tim French, TK Productions, Travis Arbon, Troop Good Guy, Tsugumo, Duram, Duayu, Twist Please, Twilight EX, Tyler Olu, Unicorn Roots, Ursula, Ushimushi, Vic Viper, Beautiful, Rena, Bulgari, Wabi Legs, What Is This? Your Nerdy Joe, Zachary Patton, Zeal, and Zenryoku.